Good evening. Welcome back to Answers on Eschatology. My name is Dan Derry, and I am the president of the Institute of Fulfilled Eschatology. We are in the middle of a study on Matthew 24, and once again, I want to share some thoughts on verse 35 concerning the passing away of heaven and earth in Jesus' generation. Now, we've established that this heaven and earth is a covenantal idiom. It means the old covenant creation. The old covenant world of Judaism. Every jot, every tittle, every element that was a part of that old covenant system and world was identified, was meant by the phrase heaven and earth. Now, I want to demonstrate that again through another text that's spoken of by Jesus earlier in his ministry, where he specifically mentions the passing away of heaven and earth. And in both texts, he is undeniably talking about the same heaven and earth to pass away at the same time, and watch this, surrounding the same circumstances, okay? Go with me to Matthew chapter 5. This is what Jesus said to his disciples in his generation. Do not think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. In other words, I didn't come to remove this old covenant world without fulfilling it. For truly I say to you, verse 18, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke will pass from the law until it is all accomplished. Now, we could go a lot of different directions in that text, but here's what I want to bring out. Jesus did say in verse 18 that heaven and earth would pass away. Notice, he says, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the law until it's all accomplished. In other words, nothing could pass from a law or the prophets, not a jot, not a tittle, until it was all fulfilled. But it would not be fulfilled. Nothing would pass from that law until heaven and earth passed away. That's what Jesus is bringing. He's bringing out more than that, but that's what I want to drive home right now. Heaven and earth was going to pass away. Yes, it was. But not until the law and the prophets were fully accomplished. That is, until they came into their full new covenant spiritual expression. Okay? Until what they had prophesied came into a reality in Jesus Christ. At that time, heavens and earth would pass away. So here's what we need to see. Jesus connects the passing away of heaven and earth in this context with the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. And in this context, the law and the prophets obviously refer to the law of Moses, number one, the Pentateuch, the Psalms, the prophets. Everything that had been written in the Old Testament world, in the Old Testament scriptures. This is what Jesus means by every jot and every tittle in the law and the prophets. All that had been written. So Jesus, once again, connects the passing away of heaven and earth in this context with the fulfillment, the full accomplishment of all that had been written. If that's the case, which it is, we should expect to find somewhere else in the biblical literature where we find the passing away of heaven and earth in the context of the fulfillment of all that had been written. Well, that's exactly what we find on the lips of Jesus in the Olivet Discourse, and specifically in Luke's account. Go with me to Luke chapter 21. Watch this. Luke 21, and let's read verse 20 and 22. Luke 21, verse 20 says, "But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near." 22, because these, what? These days, what days? When Jerusalem was surrounded by armies. These days are the days of vengeance, so that all things written would be fulfilled. That is, every jot, every tittle in the law and the prophets. Jesus said when Jerusalem was surrounded by armies in the first century, when they saw Jerusalem surrounded by armies, those would be the days of vengeance in with which all things that were written would be fulfilled. And in that very context, Luke says, that is, Luke records Jesus saying these words, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. When? Verse 32. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. So Luke, in the Olivet Discourse, which is parallel to Matthew 24, connects the passing away of heaven and earth with at the time of the fulfillment of all things written, just like Jesus did in Matthew chapter 5. The passing away of heaven and earth would not take place until every jot and every tittle in the law and the prophets was fully accomplished. And when those jots and tittles, when all prophecy, all that had been written was fully accomplished, it would all be fulfilled. It would all pass away, and heaven and earth would pass away with it. That's the point. And notice, not only does Luke say that in the days of vengeance when Jerusalem was surrounded by armies, all things written would be fulfilled. All things written are encompassed within Luke's discourse, within Jesus' discourse in Luke 21. Notice in verse 27, we have the coming of the Son of Man. That's the coming of the Lord. In 28, we have Jesus saying, lift up your head for your redemption draws near. That's the resurrection. And in verse 31, he says, when you see these things happening, recognize that the kingdom of God is near. That's the full establishment of the Messianic kingdom. That's the coming of the Lord. That's the resurrection. That's the kingdom. Those three events, the fulfillment of those three events would accomplish all things written. Those are the capstone of all eschatology. And Jesus placed them in his generation at the time of the fulfillment of all things written, when heaven and earth would pass away. And by the way, we have those same three elements in Matthew chapter 24, the text we're working through. Verse 30, we have the coming of the Son of Man in the clouds of heaven. That's the establishment of the kingdom. That's Daniel 7. At the coming of the Son of Man, that's the second coming. And in verse 31, we have the gathering together of the elect. That's the resurrection. Jesus places all those elements in his generation. Matthew 24, 34, in the context of the passing away of heaven and earth, verse 35. Perfect parallel, perfect unity, perfect harmony concerning the words of Jesus. At the passing away of heaven and earth in his generation, at the fulfillment of all things written. And guess what? That means that heaven and earth is not a global, literal passing away of the cosmos as we know it. It was a passing away of an old covenant world, an old covenant creation that was replaced by the new covenant kingdom of Jesus Christ in AD 70. And we'll have more to say next time as we get into some New Testament texts regarding the passing away of heaven and earth, specifically Hebrews chapter 12, 2 Peter chapter 3, and where else do I want to go here? Probably a text or two in Revelation as well. But we'll do that next time on Answers on Eschatology. You have a great day. Bye for now.